wearing something that someone doesn't expect you to wear, whether that's a certain colour or style, that in itself can be an incredibly powerful attribute. And for those of you that have ever decided, I'm going to try and wear something out of my comfort zone, you'll really know what I mean by this. So one of the things I think that was, to me, really helpful was actually a friend of mine let me help her with some of the clothes swap she was doing. So this is where she organised a group of people to come together. And instead of engaging, it was a different way of engaging, rather than trying to change the mainstream, saying, well, what do-it-ourselves ways can we do? What can we actually do to change things on a small local scale? So what we did is we took down a load of sewing machines. We got loads of people to switch clothes. Then we did a bit of modifying. So we were like, well, that style's not really us, so let's change it. We got some fabrics. We added in extra sections. And we basically did a very simple, small-scale DIY fat modification to make things that we wanted, to make things that made us feel excited. So that was one way that we could start thinking about how could these debates about fashion and, you know, what people should wear and what people shouldn't wear affect people regardless of what size you were. So this one event that I helped her with, we had people from a size 14 to about 30. So it was quite a range of sizes. But what was quite upsetting is, as Isha says, there is only Evans in the UK high street. And they have very limited style. And if you're at all someone that has style, you wouldn't shop at Evans. Really? Sorry, Evans will hate me for saying this. Luckily I'm not a fashion blogger, so it's fine. And one of the other projects I wanted to mention was the Adipositivity project, which, has anyone heard of that project? No. Oh, okay. Charlotte, I think, has participated.
Broken down the session to 3 distinct parts. So what I did was I looked at the description of this session, and so I've broken it into fat activism, mainstream discussions of fat and size, and feminism and fat activism. So I've asked each of the panellists to prepare some thoughts about those 3 distinct topics based on 3 questions that I sent them previously. So what I will do is I'll say the question and then we'll ask them each to speak for a few minutes on each, and then we'll go through that. And at the end of that, we'll have a more general discussion which will open up to questions from the audience as well. So the first question, actually, before we go on, at the end of this, because it is just now, we've been kindly given another space so that if people have more that they want to talk about and discuss and ask questions, a couple of the panellists are going to be going to another space, which is 3rd floor mezzanine, Proms Blue. So if you're interested in continuing the discussions afterwards, Caroline on the end is going to be leading that.
I'll be there
with
too.
Charlotte.
Yeah.
So if you want to, and they've also got some free fat activist zines for people who want them, and you can look at some of the books and that kind of thing there. So that'll be happening too. So the first question is, what is fat activism for you? Or how does your fat activism manifest itself for you? So I'll start with you, Charlotte.
With me? Okay, well, actually, before I go into that, I just want to say it's Mother's Day today, and happy Mother's Day to any mothers in the house. And I want to sort of dedicate what I'm saying to my mother, whose name is Rosemary, and she died 26 years ago, almost the day, from breast cancer. And I really miss her. And she was a nurse. She was the first to survey my body, and she was the first person to diet me when I was 7. And I wonder, often we never sort of had those conversations about feminism or about fat or about activism, because I was only 18 or so when she died. So I really wonder what she'd make of today. I kind of like to think of her hovering somewhere with her eyes, kind of working it out. Hopefully she'd be proud of me. Anyway, so what fat activism is for me, I've been thinking about and working on the question, what is fat activism, daily, not very much for the past sort of 25 25 years or so, I still don't have an easy answer. And it's a question that I came to in my master's dissertation, which was published as my book, Fat and Proud, in 1998, which was ages ago now. And I returned to it for my PhD, which was a 4-year research project that I finished last November. And during that project, I interviewed about 30 fat activists around the world, people of all different backgrounds and perspectives, many of whom had decades of experience in fat activism, and nobody gave me a consistent answer about what it actually is. And so given this, it made sense to me that fat activism can be absolutely anything. It just really depends on the context. And this makes fat activism really exciting because it means you can tailor it. You can tailor it to what you're interested in, or the things that you enjoy, or the things that you're good at, or very, very specific moments in your life. And so I kind of thought that fat activism could be something really big, like a street protest. That's the thing that most people think of as activism when I talk to people about it, or a letter writing campaign, that kind of thing. And it can be as small as a wink directed at the right person at the right time. Like that. And it can involve changing laws, but it can also involve having a conversation with somebody or wearing something good. And sometimes it's about refusal of dominant cultural values, and sometimes it's really, really ambiguous. Some fat activists try and draw lines about what is and what isn't fat activism, but I think that kind of ideological purity is completely overrated, and I'm interested in those kind of hybrids that people develop for themselves and kind of try and draw in to make livable lives. My fat activism is a part of my daily life. I don't put on a uniform or an outfit or something special to do it or go somewhere. It's really embedded in the way that I think about things, the work that I do, the people I know. It's there in how I walk and how I talk. And I don't see much separation between activism and life. You could think of it as a kind of consciousness. Sometimes I do stuff that's more recognisable as activism. So I make things. I make zines, which are small homemade publications, like this one, which I have for free. You can have a copy afterwards if you want. And sometimes I write and publish things, like my book, and I've published stuff in... Well, I'm sitting on the board for the Fat Studies Journal. It's an interdisciplinary journal of body weight and society. There's a mouthful for you. And contribute to books like the Fat Studies Reader, and also our own beautiful Fat Studies in the UK, which Corinna co-edited. So I do stuff that is activism. And sometimes my activism is very small and subtle. Can be something like breathing, or thinking, or staying alive, or laughing often. It's often about laughter. And fat's also very central to my counselling and psychotherapy practice. And I think of this practice as a form of social change. Many of the clients that I have are interested in fat stuff, but they don't know much about it. And they don't have access to fat community. And maybe they've struggled with their bodies and with diets and whatnot for years and want somewhere to take that stuff. And therapy is a place to think about the complexities of being fat in a safe place and to work through it or to develop new insight about it. And people choose me because I'm someone that's been there and who understands a lot and isn't going to say, yeah, losing weight is going to be the answer to these problems. So yeah, it's kind of like it manifests everywhere, I suppose. It's hard to separate, here's activism, here's life. It's just part of what you do, what you are.
Thanks, Charlotte.
All right.
And Isha, would you like to answer the question?
For me, fat activism goes hand in hand with fat acceptance internally and externally. Internally, I've accepted my body and love my body, so I'm quite outraged sometimes when externally I'm told that my body is not acceptable. My body belongs to me, and but I'm told every day that I don't look right. When I say this, I don't necessarily mean that people come up to me and, unload a tirade of fat hate, but it is everywhere. It's in every TV advertisement, every magazine article, every news bulletin, every newspaper article, and even in the high street. The message is very clear that I do not look the way the society expects me to look. But fat activism rejects this notion. It rejects the notion and assumption that being fat means you are subsequently unhealthy, and being thin subsequently means you're healthy. It rejects the notion that dieting is the only way to be happy, because when you're thin, you of course have no issues, no problems, no worries or no fears. This is of course indescribably incorrect. There are many reasons why people are unhappy or unwell, and the first thing that needs to be recognised is that there are varying reasons, and these reasons should be addressed. It is lazy to say that fat is the reason for depression, recession, disease, anything and every ill of the world. Fat activism is about opening people's minds and encouraging them to acknowledge the real issues which individuals struggle with every day. It's about helping said people and letting them know that they are not the problem. Society is the problem. This is the real disease, and this is the real ill. As a blogger, fact activism is about forcing people to think about these things. It's about encouraging discussion and trying to recognise the whole community, not just those within the community who are easy to accept. It's about dealing with intersectionality and the oppression of people of colour, disabled, gays, queers, trans, etc. Oppression cannot be eradicated if we do not first acknowledge it exists, and it does exist. To conclude to this question, fact activism is not about wanting a medal for daring to get out of my bed and walk out on the street every day. I'm not being, brave for wearing a brightly coloured dress today. I'm a person, I'm a human being who deserves just as much love and respect as anyone else. And that's what fact activism is for me. It's about seeking the same courtesy from society that is bestowed upon anyone who isn't fat. I think that's the very least that so-called civilised society should treat us. There's a wonderful quote by Ray Smith, who helps those who are struggling with eating disorders, and it's all over Tumblr, and people, talk about it all the time. And her quote is, "There is nothing wrong with your body, but there is a lot wrong with the message which tries to convince you otherwise." And I think that's a fitting way to end my answer, so thank you.
Thanks, Isha. And Caroline.
Thanks, Corinna. Well, it was actually, I first got into fat activism by a dear friend of mine who's also a fashion blogger, who writes the blog Fatty Unbound. And her and I would sit and have conversations, and she'd be like, "Caroline, why is it that you won't wear that outfit that you really want to wear, and you're only going to wear it in 3 years' time when you're this hypothetical different shape and different body?" And I was like, okay, I think you're right. You're onto something here. And so then she started encouraging me to be a bit more confident, as Isha says, just to wear what feels right for you. So it started in a very simple way of just what clothes can I wear? And so then it became sort of more okay, I think I'm actually a fat activist. It was after I went to the Lesbian and Gay Film Festival, where Charlotte actually was doing the Chubsters Bouncing, which is, for those of you, Charlotte helped organise a queer girl gang.
I have a sort of fake girl gang called the Chubsters, and it's for fat, queer, vicious girls, but you don't have to be fat or queer or a girl or even remotely vicious to be a part of it. And you get a membership card. Oh, I don't have one in my bag, maybe, and a badge when you get jumped in. Yeah. And in 2009, we had an event at the film festival called Chubsters Invade the BFI, which Caroline's talking about. I'm glad it had an effect on you.
Yeah, it really did. And so this event was one of. We actually have
your membership card. Okay, great.
Membership card.
Good.
Okay, so Chubsters Invade the BFI. So it was one of the first times that I'd actually gone to a film screening and seen loads of fat people on screen. And I was like, wow, this is really exciting. There are other fat people out there. I mean, because obviously you see them every day. As Charlotte said, dedicated to my mum. My mum and my family were the first people that made you aware of it. So then I was thinking, okay, I was seeing these people organise clothes swaps. They were doing DIY events. And I was like, how can I incorporate fat activism into my life? So I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher, I lecture at university, so for me, my fat activism is really tied in with my teaching. So I put a few examples here. So one of the courses I do is I teach a course about body, identity and society. And so I was given this rubric of this course, and at no point did they want me to think about what it meant to be embodied. What did it mean to actually live as a fat person? What does these negotiations that we go through every day involve? And so I was like, this is a big gap. This is a massive gap. So they weren't getting to think about obesity epidemic rhetoric. They weren't being encouraged to think critically about the discourses going on around them. So I decided, this is wrong. I don't approve of this. So I'm going to include a lecture on introducing them to fat studies. So my students, basically, my activism, like Charlotte said, my activism is a part of my life, it's a part of my teaching practice, and it's a part of my research. So I did that class. So got them to think about how is fat constructed in the media. So then other things I suppose I'm doing is, for me, being part of an event like this is actually in itself being a fat activist. Because it's actually, you're all here because you're interested and want to know more and want to talk about things and think about ideas. And so this is a way that I can share, the reading that I do in my office at home when I'm sat there with my books. And I can actually share it with people. And sharing what I sit and read and work on is really important for me. And I think when Corinna was introducing me, she mentioned that I'm starting a few new research projects. So I finished my PhD last year, and that was in sexuality studies. And I was thinking, sexuality studies hasn't thought about fat bodies, and fat studies hasn't talked much about sex yet. So I see a gap here. So basically, my new research is all about thinking about fat sex. And so I'm editing, as I said, I'm putting together a first book on that at the moment. And it's in the very early stages, so hopefully in the next year or two. So that's going to be, so for me, academia isn't divorced from activism and politics, but very much I tie the two together. And that's, so.
Brilliant, thank you. So my second question is that mainstream discussions about fat and size tend to focus on the concept of skinny versus the average sized woman. So I'm asking, what does this mainstream talk about fat and size mean for fat activism? And in particular, what does it mean for women who are bigger than the supposed average, which is 14 to 16? So I'll start with you, Isha, this time.
Okay. Fact activism, for me, is very clear. There's no fat v skinny war. We do not hate women who are thin. We do not wish them misfortune. Fact activism is about being part of a community which is supportive of body choice. Indeed, my quote from the previous question by Ray Smith, she was someone who actually struggled with anorexia for 5 years. So the war is not with her. Having said that, there is a distinction. Seeing someone who is a size 10 in a bodysuit or in shorts or a mini dress doesn't raise any eyebrows. There is no challenge, there is no question or dispute, because someone who is a size 10 is supposed to dress this way. They have the body for it. However, someone who's my size, who wears exactly the same thing, is someone who's ridiculed. Because apparently there's no desirability to be fat. The average size of a woman is apparently a size 16, yet very few retailers cater for size 16 and above. Fact activism in this regard, and particularly for plus size bloggers, is about demanding change. The only high street shop that is exclusive for plus size women is Evans. And when you look at the high street, there are tons and tons of stores, but there's only one for plus size women. This isn't good enough. We have to shop online. We have a plethora of places where we can shop online actually, but why should we have to shop online to dress our bodies? Why are we not treated the same as straight size women who have the opportunity to walk into a store, to try things on, to have a think about things, whereas we have to shop online and look at clothes, on a white background with ill-fitting mannequins, and we have to, choose 1 or 2 sizes because we're not sure if it will fit, and, we have to pay for shipping. This isn't acceptable. But, to further this, the majority of plus-size and straight-size designers are men. And again, going back to the ideologies of what a woman should look like, and the way that we should dress our bodies, the colours that we should wear. It's ironic that women still struggle in this department, designing clothes to dress our own bodies. But the plus-size community and the blogger community are trying to get answers and implore retailers to reconsider the desire to keep us indoors on our laptops and clicking buttons. We are yet to get these answers, but the activists among us will continue to try and be treated like any other consumer.
Thank you, Isha.
Thank you.
Caroline?
Well, actually, Isha started to address some of the things that I was going to raise about this, in that I think you brought some really important points. So, about this idea that all people, we are all people at the end of the day, and actually creating this average, skinny, fat debate between the 3 categories, it isn't actually particularly useful in helping different groups of people understand one another. So I think that's kind of also a challenge about how this sort of rhetorics work. What's one of these? I was going to say, because for me, it was actually reading fashion blogs, written by people like Isha, that actually helped me realise, okay, so that is a way that people are negotiating with this mainstream discourses about fat and size and the average UK-sized woman. Because by actually literally wearing something that someone doesn't expect you to wear, whether that's a certain colour or style, that in itself can be an incredibly powerful attribute. And for those of you that have ever decided, I'm going to try and wear something out of my comfort zone, you'll really know what I mean by this. So one of the things I think that was, to me, really helpful was actually a friend of mine let me help her with some of the clothes swap she was doing. So this is where she organised a group of people to come together. And instead of engaging, it was a different way of engaging, rather than trying to change the mainstream, saying, well, what do-it-ourselves ways can we do? What can we actually do to change things on a small local scale? So what we did is we took down a load of sewing machines, we got loads of people to switch clothes, then we did a bit of modifying, so we were like, well, that style's not really us, so let's change it. We got some fabrics, we added in extra sections. And we basically did a very simple, small-scale DIY fat modification to make things that we wanted, to make things that made us feel excited. So that was one way that we could start thinking about how could these debates about fashion and, what people should wear and what people shouldn't wear affect people regardless of what size you were. So at this one event that I helped her with, we had people from a size 14 to about 30. So it was quite a range of sizes. But what was quite upsetting is, as Isha says, there is only Evans in the UK high street. And they have very limited style. And if you're at all someone that has style, you wouldn't shop at Evans. Really? Sorry, Evans will hate me for saying this. Luckily I'm not a fashion blogger, so it's fine. And one of the other projects I wanted to mention was the Adipositivity project, which, has anyone heard of that project? No. Oh, okay. Charlotte, I think, has participated in it.
There are a few pictures of me on that project, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's an online project about showing fat people an embodiment and thinking about different ranges of what it means for beauty and what does size and beauty mean. And perhaps, would Charlotte like to take over?
It's a blog by this woman called Substantia Jones. She lives in New York, and it's actually, is it on the list? Did we put it on the list?
I don't know that we did.
Oh no! That's a tragedy.
Project.
You must look at it. Perhaps the person who's tweeting can add that link into the tweets. It's a really fantastic resource, a repository of hundreds of images of fat people that Substantia's taking pictures of, including me.
yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we thought about that, because for me that was a way of changing the discussion slightly. So changing the discussion from thinking about to think about beauty in a more broader sense, and so in a broader spectrum. So that was just one of the ideas I wanted to include and make sure people were aware of. What was one? And I think it's really that sort of, you can actually have these small-scale activist interventions by, these sort of events and by those sort of things where I was saying that we sat and made clothes. That can be another way of changing and moving away from some of the dominant debates that are happening. But I think that's kind of me concluding, or I'll just keep rambling.
Thanks a lot, Caroline.
So,
Charlotte.
Yeah, it's a real shame that Kirsty isn't here, actually, from Fatty Unbound, because she has a lot to say about fashion and consumerism and DIY. But I'm going to move away from fashion now. But I also wanted to come back about the fat versus skinny thing, because when my book came out, a lot of the press wanted to pitch me against Kate Moss. Now, I have nothing against Kate Moss. I love Kate Moss. I went to a party a few years ago with Kate Moss was there, and I showed her how to do donut hands, which is like the Chubster sign. Did donut hands with Kate Moss. It's like, Kate Moss is not the object of my ire. I have no beef with Kate Moss, but that fat versus skinny comes up all the time. It's really maddening. When the discussion is about skinniness or averageness, what it means is that some people get to dominate the conversation at the expense of other people. And I think there's room for everybody to talk about fat if they want to. It's a really compelling subject, no matter what your size is. And ideally, we would be able to acknowledge that there are differences in the way that we talk about fat. So my experience of fat will differ from somebody who's much fatter than me, for example, and also someone who's smaller, or straight, or middle class, or who lives in a different country, or who has other things going on that makes them different to me. But sadly, there isn't much diversity in who gets to talk about fat. And this is certainly played out in obesity policy. I was going to say you almost never see this, but actually you never see it. You never see anyone fat in any position of power talking about what it's like to be fat at a high level, a high policy level. We're usually abstracted as the obese, or presented as really passive, or as patients, never as people with voices of our own. And in 2007, I identified a trend I call headless fatties. There are loads of images of fat people in the media, loads. Every time there's a story on fat, which is about twice a week, a major story, there's always a picture of fat people, but our heads are always cut out of the frame. It's as though we have absolutely nothing to say for ourselves. And lots of people have picked up on this headless fatty thing that I identified. I'm hoping it's going to get included in the Oxford English Dictionary at some time soon. Maybe I'll get a royalty for it. That would be good. But it's not just high-level policy that this marginalising happens. It also plays out in feminism. Particular debates around body image or dieting or beauty or size zero or eating disorders or appearance, these become conflated with fat. And these discussions are vital. They're absolutely vital. But they're not the same as a discussion about fat. And it means that the opportunity to fat people to talk directly about our lives, about the specificity, can I say that word? Specificity of fatness. These discussions get pushed to the side or they get overlooked. And some fat people are much more vulnerable to this marginalising than others. And it also means that some people start to talk for us, or assume that their debate is the same thing as the stuff that we're talking about, when it isn't really. And this is one of the reasons that I suggested this panel be called Fat Talks Back. I mean, my feeling is that we're pretty sick of being spoken for and we want to speak for ourselves. I think there's room for every kind of body in a movement that seeks to explore the complexity of having a body. It's really complicated and difficult having a body, and also the experiences of being fat. But what's important is that we listen to each other and we acknowledge the differences and the power and the privilege around those differences as well, and that we try and make space for all these different kind of ways of understanding and thinking about fat and bodies. We bring them all to the table, because I truly think there's room for all of us.
Thank you. And so to my final question, which is, how does fatness and feminism intersect for you? So we'll start this time with Caroline.
Well, thank you, Corinna. Actually, that follows on quite nicely. Charlotte's given a nice introduction for what I was going to say about fatness and feminism. Because for me, I started reading feminist texts when I was, 14, 15. And started thinking, okay, so I'm reading all these texts. They're always talking about eating disorders. They're always talking about size zeros, talking about what it's like being skinny. I was like, I'm not in any of this. So I didn't really know what to make of it for a long time. And I didn't really ask it as a question. And I actually only started really thinking about how could I think of fat and feminism as connected after I'd actually met my very dear friend, who isn't here today, unfortunately, who's the blogger Fatty Unbound. And she actually, by asking me and having these, conversations over a cup of tea, we'd be baking cake together, we started talking about, well, so why aren't there those discussions? Why was there the gap of, thinking about what it means to have fat embodiment? Why were there the gaps of what it means to have fat and sexuality? So I suppose I started thinking about it, because obviously I'm an academic, so I came at it from this sort of very kind of theoretical point of view, looking for gaps in literature, looking for gaps in arguments. But then I realised I live my life as a day-to-day person, activist, academic, as a feminist. So I do believe that it's very important to think about equality. I believe it's important to think about differences, privilege, roles of power, and how we all embody those. So when I was coming across, I think it was Sam Murray, who's an activist and academic out in Australia, and she wrote a book on the fat female body. And so I read this book a few years ago, and it was this massive eye-awakening for me, as it made me think about, so what about the gendering of fat? So why is it that, say, fat gets tied in with, at one hand you're meant to be this hyper-feminine, because you kind of have this surplus of curvy flesh, potentially. But at the same time you're asexual, because you've got too much flesh and you don't conform to this one body type. And so that was really confusing, and I was like, I need to think about this. I still haven't got there, so I don't have any final thoughts, but it's sort of questions thinking about, so what is the gendering? Why is this happening? So what are the discourses that make these kind of questions relevant, and why do we need to think about them? And so I think for me, one of the reasons that I want to think about the relationship between fat and feminism is to think about all the different types of embodiment. How does being an embodied person impact on the way you negotiate your sort of day-to-day feminist practice? And why does sometimes, as Charlotte said, why is it those that are fat often aren't able to speak for themselves? And so, for me, I would say being able to even have a voice that is listened to is actually me combining fat and feminism together. So, thank you.
Thank you. Isha,
Sorry?
would you like to
Are
go
we on
next?
question 3?
Yes.
Yeah, question 3.
Oh, sorry. I was just like so engrossed. I was like, it's not enough. Well, misogyny and patriarchy exist, so of course feminism exists. This is 2013, yet there is still a stigma surrounding women and what we're meant to look like. Feminism, in its very, very basic terms, is about fighting to be acknowledged as a man's equal, about being given the same opportunities and the same rights and respect. We can talk about the Oscars a little bit, where the women in attendance were used as fodder for cheap, lazy and unsolicited jokes. There were talks about their breasts, their worth within the industry, their desirability. Even a 9-year-old child was sexualized for a cheap joke. A 9-year-old girl. This would never have happened to a man. Yet it got laughs, and apparently this is comedy. Women are always sexualized every day and judged for their looks alone. So being a fat woman is seen as in society as disgusting. No man would ever want to date or sleep with her. it's the ultimate sin, being a woman and being a woman who's fat. The media, of course, have a lot to answer for. Women in particular are used to keep consumer brands afloat. We are used to buy anti-aging creams, to sign up to fad diets, to buy magazines with unrealistic attainment. These magazines are filled with photoshopped and airbrushed women, but this is something that we should strive for, apparently. Unrealistic goals which make us hate ourselves when we don't achieve these goals. And, you know, it's the thing that we need to do is try to detrain ourselves into thinking that we need to look like someone from a magazine. And body autonomy is about being independent and having freedom to dress yourself the way you wish to be treated. And as a woman, I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Isha.
Thank you.
So, Charlotte, the challenge I offer you today.
Yes, I'll take that challenge, Corinna.
About this massive topic that we've both written about quite a lot, fat and feminism in 3 minutes.
Okay, I don't know, I'll try 3 minutes, okay. When I was little, I didn't know that libraries existed. I didn't know anything about libraries, so when I wanted to find out about sex, so I went to bookshops and I read all the sex education books at the local bookshop in Hereford where I lived at the time, and luckily the booksellers just left me alone to get on with it. But next to the books on sex were the books on feminism, so I gradually kind of worked my way along, and I read there was a book called The Spare Rib Reader, which had one tiny chapter in it about fat. And I was really transfixed by this. And then some years passed, and I found out more about fat activism through a feminist organisation in the UK called the London Fat Women's Group, who held a conference in 1989 and were pretty active. So there was this kind of earlier work around feminism in the second wave that that I discovered as a young woman. And my earliest understandings of what it is to be fat was rooted in fairly second wave feminist politics and values that was to do with my reading that I'd done when I was much younger. But I also think of myself as a queer. I come from punk, so it was more of a postmodern third wave feminist sensibility that really spoke to me about fat. A zine called Fat Girl came out of the Bay Area in California in the mid-90s, and I was a contributor to this zine. I don't know if I was in the first issue, but certainly I was in all the other issues. Six of them came out. And it helped me develop ideas around identity and community around fat. And also Fat Girl was a bridge between this earlier body of work by feminists and kind of like moving it forward as well. So they talked about pop culture, they talked about sex a lot, they had a queer and trans aesthetic, they talked about identity in a way that I recognised, they embraced technology, so they were starting to do a lot of stuff on the web at that time, and they were really riotous and badly behaved. And I have to say that I've owed my life to the Leather Dykes of San Francisco. Really, I'm so grateful to them for the work that they did and the relationships that we built from San Francisco to East London, where I live. So what I'm trying to say is that just as there are many, many kinds of feminism, there are also many feminist ways of thinking and talking about fat. It's not just one thing. And sometimes you think it is one thing because of the sort of discussions that have happened up until now. But it's a dynamic relationship that shifts all the time. There's no feminist party line on fat at all. There's no rules to obey. There's no one story, but there are many stories. And lately, to do with my research, I've been spending a lot of time in archives, and I've been revisiting this second wave feminism and looking at artefacts from a very early fat feminism that has become really hidden. It pains me how hidden it is. I'm talking about fat feminist communities that were active in California and in New England from the early 70s to the mid-80s or so. So people like Judy Free Spirit, Aldebaran, the Fat Underground, Judith Stein, Boston Area Fat Liberation, the New Haven Fat Liberation Front. Probably nobody knows these names. I mean, to me that's a crime. It's a crime you don't know these people. And so they were the first to theorise fat. They used feminism, and they've been rewarded with obscurity. I mean, it horrifies me. So it's not it's this older fat feminist work that I'm revisiting in my research, and not just looking at archives, but digging up old journals, speaking to the women who created this work, because I think it's been terribly overlooked, and it's really radical and visionary. And I notice a lot of the discussion around fat these days is about, oh, ain't it awful, it's terrible, and it is terrible. I'm not denying it's terrible. The situation is terrible if you're fat. But also there's this earlier body of work that offers ways of thinking about it and acting on it in really, really productive ways, and thinking about activism. Most people are really unaware that there's this longish, only about 40 years or so, tradition associated with fat activism that's rooted in feminism. And when people start thinking critically about fat, they often feel really isolated. They think, oh, I'm the first person ever to realise this. But actually, you know, you're not. We're all literally standing on the shoulders of giants. And I hope the work that we do here will go on to influence other people too. I'm really interested in extending these fat feminist accounts by developing and recording community-based fat activist histories. And a project I did in 2010, 2011 was called A Queer and Trans Fat Activist Timeline. You can find this on my blog, Obesity Time Bomb, where a group of us in a room made a timeline of memories and moments and things that we thought were historically significant about queer and trans fat feminist identity. And so we made this object. I made a zine out of it. There's artifacts about it on the web. The object became archived. It wrote a paper about it. It became all these different kind of things. And I suppose I want to mention this project in sort of closing, just to say that it kind of showed that there are many ways of doing fat feminist activism that's rooted in history. And the importance of speaking for ourselves, I think the timeline really kind of highlighted that, how transformative that can be, about finding and recognising each other and recording our stories. And it's, I guess, sort of expanding fat feminism as well. I really hope that that's what we're doing today, and that the accounts that we've given on this platform will turn into discussions, and that people will take fat feminism and turn it into something for themselves. Because I think there are many stories, and, you know, I really want to see that flourish and grow and develop, and not be restricted to a few touchstones. I want it to be a really big thing, because it's been so magnificently transformative in my own life. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you.